Talon's translucent blue fingers trembled slightly as she hovered over the unconscious human. The sterile glow of the medchamber illuminated his prone form, casting sharp shadows over his pale, scar-ridden skin. His species was unfamiliar to her, and despite her rigorous training as a healer of the Merithi order, she had never tended to an off-worlder before. Ryan Porter, the stranded pilot, had been pulled from the wreckage of his vessel 3 nights ago. His body was battered, his breathing shallow, and his injuries, though mostly external, suggested a brutal crash landing. If not for the patrol scouts finding him when they did, he would have perished alone in the acidic mists of Ulix's 4's marshlands. Talon exhaled through her gill slits, trying to suppress the nervous flutter in her twin hearts. This was just another patient, nothing more. The humans were a peculiar race, their flesh strangely dry, their bodies clumsy in water. She had studied their physiology in data texts, but a living, breathing example lay before her now, and she realized just how woefully unprepared she was. She had to cleanse his wounds before applying the regenerative serum, but there was one problem. Humans wore fabric coverings over their bodies. A nuisance. With delicate precision, she used her webbed fingers to peel away the tattered remains of his uniform. The smooth planes of his chest were marred by bruises, the dark purple hues oddly beautiful against his pale skin. Blood had crusted along a gash near his ribs, and Talon dipped the cloth into the warm, cleansing solution before gently pressing it against his flesh. The reaction was immediate. A low groan escaped his lips, and his body twitched beneath her touch. Talon froze, eyes widening. Was he waking? Had she caused him pain? She hesitated, then resumed her task, this time moving lower, wiping away the dried blood from his abdomen. Her long, sinuous tail coiled nervously behind her, a reflex she had yet to suppress. Then, something stirred beneath the blanket. Talon's gills flared in alarm as she instinctively drew back, her gaze snapping to the movement. Was he in distress? Was this some kind of seizure? She had encountered involuntary muscle spasms in other species before, but this was different. Curious, she leaned in, pressing 2 fingers gently against his side to monitor his vitals. The motion beneath the blanket persisted, subtle, yet undeniable. She hesitated, then reached out to peel back the fabric, her scientific mind battling with her growing unease. Ryan suddenly groaned again, his head rolling to the side. His eyelids fluttered, and then, in a hoarse, half-conscious voice, he muttered, "God, am I dreaming?" Talon jolted upright, dropping the cloth. "You are awake," she stated, a little too quickly. "You have suffered extensive injuries, but you are stable." His eyes cracked open, revealing unfocused blue irises. He blinked at her, and for a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the med-chamber between them. Then he groaned again, shifting slightly, and his gaze drifted downward. "Oh, hell," he croaked, realization dawning in his face. Listen, this is not what it looks like." Talon frowned. "It looks like an involuntary physiological reaction." Ryan coughed, grimacing as pain shot through his ribs. "Yeah, let's, go with that." Talon tilted her head. "Are you in pain? Mortally embarrassed?" "Yes." "Pain?" "Also yes." She hesitated, then retrieved the cloth from where it had fallen, dipping it back into the solution. "I must finish cleansing your wounds," she stated, her tone professional. Ryan groaned again, this time in sheer exasperation. Ryan had been through a lot in his life. Space battles, emergency crash landings, once even an awkward diplomatic encounter with a gelatinous life form that tried to absorb his leg. But waking up to an alien healer mistaking his morning wood for a medical emergency was a first. The Merithi were an aquatic race, their bodies adapted for life in the deep ocean trenches of their homeworld. Talon was taller than him, willowy, with iridescent skin that shimmered between shades of cerulean and violet. Her large, luminescent eyes were entirely black, her delicate features framed by bioluminescent tendrils that faintly pulsed in the dim light. And right now, she was staring at him with the kind of analytical curiosity that made him distinctly uncomfortable. He cleared his throat, attempting to shift position. only to wince as a sharp pain lanced through his ribs. So, you said I'm stable? Talon nodded, dipping the cloth again before pressing it against his shoulder. Your injuries were extensive, but I have administered regeneration therapy. Your bone fractures are healing at an accelerated rate. Ryan let out a slow breath. That's good. Thanks. She inclined her head, but her eyes flickered downward again, her brow ridges furrowing. Ryan followed her gaze, then shut his eyes in pure mortification. Okay, look, can we just forget that happened? Talon blinked at him. It is a natural response of your physiology. Why would we forget it? Because some things don't need to be discussed in excruciating detail? Talon tilted her head in that alien way of hers. I do not understand. Do humans feel shame for involuntary bodily functions? Ryan let out a short, strangled laugh. Yeah, we do. Talon regarded him for a long moment, then simply said, that is inefficient. Ryan snorted despite himself. Well, welcome to humanity, sweetheart. We're a mess. She did not respond immediately, instead dipping the cloth once more and returning to her work. Ryan tensed at first, but when she showed no further reaction to his earlier predicament, he slowly began to relax. The silence stretched between them, but it was no longer uncomfortable. Finally, Talon spoke, her voice softer this time. You are the first human I have treated. I apologize if my actions cause discomfort. Ryan cracked an eye open. Nah, you're doing fine. He gave her a lopsided grin. A little weird, but fine. Talon studied him for a moment before her lips quirked in what might have been amusement. I will endeavor to be less weird. Ryan chuckled, and for the first time since crashing onto this strange, oceanic world, he felt something other than pain and exhaustion. He felt curious. Ryan adjusted himself on the medchamber's cushioned surface, biting back a grimace as his ribs protested. His body still felt like it had been chewed up and spat out by a black hole, but compared to how he'd felt when he first woke up, this was practically a vacation. Talon had resumed her work, meticulously cleaning the remaining wounds with a precision that made Ryan wonder just how different their medical training was. The Merithi were aquatic, graceful, efficient, accustomed to weightless movement. Every touch of her webbed fingers was light, deliberate, careful. And yet, beneath that practiced demeanor, he sensed something else. Hesitation? You okay? He asked, watching her closely. Talon paused, her fingers hovering over his forearm. I am adequate. Ryan smirked, raising an eyebrow. That's not convincing. She exhaled through her gill slits, a faint shimmer pulsing along the tendrils framing her face. I am uncertain. About what? Her black eyes flicked to his, unblinking. Your biology. I have studied the human form in records, but physical interaction provides many unknowns. Ryan's smirk widened. Yeah, I kinda picked up on that. Talon did not react to his teasing. Instead, she glanced toward the glowing interface panel embedded in the wall, her expression contemplative. I believe I am unqualified. Ryan blinked. He hadn't expected that. What are you talking about? You saved my life. Talon's tendrils dimmed slightly, a Merithi equivalent of a sigh. I am a healer. It is my duty to preserve life. Yet, my knowledge of your species is incomplete. I do not wish to cause further harm through ignorance. Ryan studied her for a long moment. He recognized that look, the weight of responsibility, the fear of failure. He had seen it in the eyes of medics on the battlefield, in pilots before a high-risk mission. Gingerly, he reached out and touched her wrist. Her skin was cool, smooth, slightly damp. Talon's eyes flickered in surprise, but she did not pull away. Hey, he said, voice softer. You're doing fine. You don't have to be perfect. Talon regarded him, the glow of her bioluminescent markings pulsing faintly. Merithi do not strive for perfection. We strive for precision. Ryan chuckled. That explains a lot. Silence settled between them again, but this time, it was easier. Talon resumed her work, and Ryan let himself relax. He had no idea what kind of world he had crash-landed into, but one thing was certain. This healer, this strange, meticulous, beautiful alien, had saved him. And that meant something. 2 days passed. Ryan's body, thanks to the regenerative therapy, was recovering at a speed that would have put Earth's medical advancements to shame. His ribs were still tender, but he could sit up without wanting to black out, a definite improvement. Talon remained his primary caretaker, checking his vitals, administering treatments, and, on occasion, answering his endless stream of questions. "So, you guys live underwater?" "Yes." "Like, full-time?" "Yes." Ryan whistled. "That's wild. I mean, I figured, with the gills and all, but I didn't think you'd have an entire civilization down there." Talon tilted her head. "Where else would we exist?" Ryan grinned. "I don't know. I was expecting dome cities or something. Not, like, Mermaid Atlantis." Talon blinked. "I do not understand this reference." Ryan laughed. "I'll explain later." It was strange how quickly he had come to enjoy their conversations. At first, he thought of her as distant, clinical, a little too precise in the way she spoke. But as time passed, he noticed the subtle shifts in her expressions, the soft flickers of bioluminescence when she was thinking, the faintest traces of curiosity in her questions. She was fascinating. And then, the moment came that changed everything. Talon entered the med chamber that evening with an announcement. "The elders have approved your relocation." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Relocation? You cannot remain here indefinitely. Your presence in the healer's ward is temporary. You require full rehabilitation, which cannot be provided in isolation." Ryan hesitated. "So, where am I going?" Talon met his gaze, and for the first time, her tendrils pulsed in a way that he almost mistook for uncertainty. "To the city beneath the waves." Ryan's breath caught. Shit. The next morning, they took him to the ocean. Ryan had assumed the Merithi had some kind of fancy transportation system, maybe even pressurized suits for air breathers like himself. He was wrong. The transition chamber was a vast, circular structure, its walls lined with intricate, pulsating runes. The air was thick with moisture, a faint hum vibrating through the chamber's floor. Talon stood beside him, her usual composure unwavering. "The descent will be gradual. You will not experience discomfort." Ryan eyed the massive pool in the center of the chamber with a mixture of awe and apprehension. "That's reassuring." Talon stepped forward, her movements fluid, effortless. "Do you trust me?" Ryan hesitated. Then, he looked at her, really looked at her. Her luminous eyes, steady and calm. The subtle glow of her markings. The way she had saved him, healed him, cared for him when she could have left him to die. He exhaled. "Yeah," he said. "I do." Talon extended a hand. Ryan took it, and together, they stepped into the abyss. The water was colder than Ryan expected. The moment he stepped forward, it swallowed him whole. His instinct screamed. Every fiber of his being told him to fight, to break free, to surface. But Talon's grip was firm. Her webbed fingers locked around his wrist as she guided him downward. He forced himself to focus on her. The chamber's luminescent walls cast an eerie glow through the water, the runes flickering with an energy he didn't understand. The liquid wasn't just water. It was denser, infused with something alive. It clung to his skin, seeping into his lungs. His lungs. Panic surged through him. He gasped, only to find that he could breathe. Ryan choked, his body caught between terror and astonishment. He expected water to fill his lungs, to drown him, but instead, it settled inside him like air. His heart pounded. He turned to Talon, wide-eyed, hands grasping at his own chest. She met his gaze with quiet patience. "The transition is complete," she said, her voice flowing smoothly through the water as if they were still in open air. Ryan coughed. "What the hell just happened?" "The immersion process altered the way your body processes oxygen," she explained. "The liquid you are breathing now is a suspension medium. It bonds with your bloodstream to facilitate respiration." Ryan gaped at her. "And you didn't think to mention this beforehand?" Talon blinked, bioluminescent tendrils pulsing faintly. "Would it have changed your decision?" "I mean, no, but I really would have liked a warning." She tilted her head, the faintest quirk of her lips betraying amusement. Ryan exhaled, in the water, and despite the absurdity of it all, forced himself to relax. The panic faded. For the first time, he took in his surroundings. The descent chamber was vast, its walls stretching into darkness above. The runes pulsed in steady rhythm, casting shifting patterns across the water. Below, an open passage led into the unknown depths. Talon gestured toward it. Come. She swam forward, effortless, her long limbs moving with the kind of grace Ryan could never hope to match. He tried to follow, kicking his legs, moving his arms, but instead of gliding, he flailed, his movements sluggish and uncoordinated. Talon turned, watching him with something close to bemusement. You are inefficient, Ryan grumbled. Yeah, well, humans don't live underwater. She swam closer. Without a word, she extended her hand again. Ryan hesitated, then took it. The moment her fingers closed around his, she propelled them forward, her body a sleek, elegant force in the water. The speed was dizzying. The passage yawned open before them, darkness giving way to something vast, something unimaginable. Ryan barely had time to process the scale of it. Then, they emerged into the city beneath the waves. Ryan had seen megastructures before. He had walked beneath the towering spires of Earth's orbital colonies, flown between the neon-lit skyscrapers of Titan's floating metropolises. But he had never seen anything like this. The Merithi city sprawled below him, an intricate web of glowing architecture woven into the ocean's depths. Towering structures rose from the seafloor, their organic curves illuminated by bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in mesmerizing sequences. Pathways of light crisscrossed between them, forming roads of pure energy. Strange, manta-like creatures drifted overhead, their translucent bodies gliding through the water effortlessly. Schools of luminous fish darted between the structures, leaving trails of color in their wake. And the people, Ryan's breath caught as he saw them. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of Merithi moved through the city, their forms sleek and elegant, their bioluminescent markings shifting in unreadable patterns. Some swam freely, their movements impossibly fluid, while others walked along the glowing pathways, their tails coiling and uncoiling in practiced grace. It was a world entirely alien to him, and yet it was beautiful. Ryan turned to Talon, awe evident in his expression. This is insane. Talon regarded the city with the calm familiarity of someone who had lived within it her entire life. It is home. Ryan let out a low whistle. Hell of a home. She gestured toward a structure in the distance, one larger than the rest, its surface shimmering with complex geometric patterns. That is the Hall of Elders. They have granted you temporary residence while you recover. Ryan nodded slowly. So, what happens now? Talon hesitated, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked uncertain. The interior of the Hall of Elders was a cathedral of liquid light. The chamber itself was massive, carved from some kind of translucent mineral that pulsed with energy. The ceiling was high, domed, shimmering with the reflections of the ocean beyond. At its center stood a raised platform, upon which 3 Merithi elders floated, their forms draped in iridescent robes that shifted like water. Their bioluminescence was intense, far stronger than Talon's, each pulse of light seemingly communicating in ways Ryan couldn't begin to comprehend. Talon guided him forward, her posture rigid, formal. Ryan swallowed. He had never been great with authority. One of the elders turned their gaze upon him, black eyes unreadable. When they spoke, their voice was deeper than Talon's, resonant in the water. You are the human. Ryan cleared his throat. Yeah. Ryan Porter, pilot, survivor of an extremely unpleasant crash landing. The elders regarded him in silence. Then, another spoke. You are fortunate to be alive. Ryan nodded. Believe me, I'm aware. Talon stepped forward. His recovery is progressing well. I have ensured. The elder lifted a hand, and she fell silent. We did not summon you to discuss your injuries, they said, their gaze never leaving Ryan. We summoned you to determine your fate. Ryan stiffened. Fate. Talon's bioluminescence flickered rapidly, a subtle warning. Another elder leaned forward. Your presence in our city is unprecedented. Humans do not belong in the depths. Ryan exhaled slowly. Hey, believe me, I didn't plan on being here. The first elder's gaze darkened. And yet, you are here. Silence settled over the chamber. Ryan glanced at Talon. For the first time, he saw something in her expression that unsettled him. Fear. Something was wrong. And suddenly, he had the sinking feeling that this wasn't just about whether or not he belonged in their world. It was about whether or not they would let him leave. Ryan felt the pressure of the water around him grow heavier, or maybe it was just the way the elders were looking at him. Like a foreign object, something unknown, something wrong. He had been in interrogations before. He'd sat across from commanding officers, from hostile diplomats, even from enemy soldiers who weren't sure whether to kill him or negotiate. But this was something else entirely. The elders didn't just see him. They were measuring him. You are an anomaly, the first elder intoned, his deep voice resonating through the water. Your kind has never stepped beyond the shallows. The depths are not meant for you. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Hey, I didn't exactly buy a ticket down here. My ship crashed. I was half dead. You saved me. The elder's expression remained unreadable. Yes. A silence stretched between them. Ryan clenched his jaw. So what's the problem? The second elder finally spoke, their voice softer but no less severe. The problem is what comes after. Talon's fingers twitched at her sides, her markings pulsing in a rhythmic flicker. Ryan had been around her long enough now to recognize what that meant. She was nervous. The first elder leaned forward, his luminous eyes boring into Ryan. You have seen our world. You breathe as we breathe. You have entered the sacred depths. Ryan frowned. So? It's not like I'm gonna start selling postcards. The elder ignored his sarcasm. No air breather has set foot here in recorded history. If you were to return to your people, realization hit Ryan like a weight to the chest. They didn't just see him as an anomaly. They saw him as a liability. He had seen too much. If he left, he would be proof that their world existed, that humans could survive down here. And that meant, you're debating whether or not to let me go, Ryan said, his voice quieter now. Talon inhaled sharply. The elders said nothing. Ryan let out a slow breath, his fingers curling into fists. He glanced at Talon again, searching her expression for something. Anything that would tell him what she was thinking. Her markings pulsed faintly. A slow, measured rhythm. Wait, it was the same flicker pattern he had seen before, when she was monitoring his heartbeat. She was telling him to stay calm. Ryan exhaled, schooling his expression. His mind raced, calculating his next move. So what? He said, forcing an easy smile. You planning to keep me in a fish tank for the rest of my life? The first elder's expression darkened. The third elder, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke, their voice an eerie, melodic whisper. There is another option. Ryan tensed. The elder turned to Talon. You are responsible for him, his survival, his integration. If he is to remain, he must become one of us. Talon's body stiffened. Her markings flared bright. Ryan's stomach twisted. Wait, what does that mean? The first elder's gaze did not waver. It means you will no longer be human. Ryan stood frozen, his mind scrambling to process what he had just heard. Hold on, he said slowly, lifting a hand. You're saying you want to turn me into a Merithi? The third elder's bioluminescence pulsed in agreement. In form, if not in origin. You would undergo the deep binding ritual. Ryan turned to Talon. And I'm guessing that's not just some casual spa treatment? She hesitated. It is a permanent transformation. Ryan stared. Permanent? Talon's tendrils flickered in unreadable patterns. Your body would adapt fully to the depths. You would no longer require air. Your skin, your organs, everything would change. It is the only way to ensure you can survive here. Ryan exhaled sharply. Jesus! The elders watched him in silence. His thoughts spun. He had fought to survive this long. Through the crash, through the pain, through the sheer alienness of this world. And now, the only way forward was to stop being human? Was this really a choice? Stay as he was, and they would never let him leave. The alternative? Give up everything he had ever known. His body, his world, his humanity. Ryan swallowed hard. The weight of the ocean pressed around him. "And if I refuse?" he asked, already knowing the answer. The first elder's eyes darkened. "Then you cannot stay." Ryan clenched his jaw. They'd kill him. No escape. No way home. Only two options: die human, or live as something else. His pulse pounded in his ears. He turned to Talon again. She wasn't just watching him. She was waiting. For his answer. For his decision. Ryan inhaled deeply, feeling the alien water fill his lungs. And then, finally, he spoke. "Tell me about the ritual." The chamber was carved from ancient stone, its walls lined with bioluminescent veins that pulsed in slow, rhythmic patterns. The water here was heavier, thicker, vibrating with an unseen force. Ryan stood at the center, stripped down to nothing but his skin. Talon stood beside him, her fingers lightly brushing his wrist, a silent reassurance. "The deep binding will change you," she said softly. "You will not feel pain, but you will feel everything." Ryan exhaled. "Great. Love that." She hesitated, then added, "Once it begins, there is no reversal." Ryan glanced at her. "You having second thoughts?" Her markings flickered. "No." A pause. "But I do not wish for you to suffer." Ryan managed a lopsided grin. "Well, I've survived worse." Talon studied him for a long moment, then inclined her head. "Then let us begin." She stepped back, and the elders moved forward. Ryan braced himself. The first elder raised a hand, and the water shuddered. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, felt more than heard. The glowing veins in the walls brightened, and suddenly, Ryan's skin burned cold. He gasped, clutching his chest. The sensation wasn't pain. It was transformation. His skin tingled. His bones shifted. Something inside him unraveled, then rewove itself into something new. He felt the water embrace him, seeping into his cells, rewriting his biology. His lungs dissolved, replaced by something more efficient. His limbs felt longer, his senses sharper. Light exploded behind his eyes. He wasn't human anymore. He was something else, something new. And as the ritual completed, as his mind settled into its new form, only one thought remained. I survived. But at what cost? The silence was the first thing Ryan noticed. Not true silence. The water still thrummed with energy. The distant hum of the city's life flow still pulsed in the background. But his silence, the sound of his own breathing, was gone. There was no air to inhale, no lungs expanding in his chest. Instead, something deeper, more intrinsic, processed the water around him, drawing oxygen not through breath but through absorption. His body had changed. He opened his eyes. Colors burst into his vision. Not the colors he was used to. The deep sea blues and greens of the Merithi city were overlaid with new spectrums, shifting heat signatures, the faint electromagnetic pulses of living things. Everything was too clear, too sharp. He moved, and his limbs responded differently, smoother, more fluid. His hands, once calloused and rough, now bore faint webbing between the fingers. His skin, once merely pale, had taken on an iridescent shimmer beneath the chamber's glow. Talon was standing in front of him. For the first time, he truly saw her. Her bioluminescence wasn't just an aesthetic glow. It was language, a delicate shifting of colors and pulses that conveyed meaning in ways words never could. Before, he had seen it as simple flickering, but now, he understood it. She was watching him carefully, her body still, her colors steady, waiting. Ryan swallowed, except he didn't. The motion was different now, his throat adjusting to not needing air. "That was a hell of a ride," he muttered. His voice was different, not just deeper, resonant. The water carried his words in a way air never could. Talonous markings flickered with something that might have been amusement. "You have survived." Ryan exhaled, again, not truly exhaling, but something like it. He flexed his fingers, testing them, before glancing down at his own reflection in the chamber's polished stone floor. The stranger stared back. His face was still his, but subtly different, more angular. His eyes, once dull human blue, now shimmered with dark, liquid depths. His jawline seemed more pronounced, the skin along his neck faintly patterned with the same kind of markings that ran along Talon's collarbone. And his lungs were gone. He touched his throat instinctively. He could feel something there, a faint, delicate structure along the sides of his neck, gills. His body had adapted. His voice trailed off as he looked at Talon again. She stepped closer, reaching out, webbed fingers hovering just above his arm. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. Ryan let out a sharp, breathless laugh. "Like I should be freaking out more." She tilted her head. "Perhaps your mind is adjusting as well." Ryan frowned. "Adjusting?" "The transformation is not only physical," she said, studying him closely. "The deep binding alters perception. The mind must be able to accept what the body has become." Ryan's stomach twisted, not out of fear, but because part of him realized she was right. A part of him wasn't horrified. A part of him felt natural. He flexed his fingers again, watching how the water moved around them, responding to his presence. He had fought so hard to stay human, to hold on to the pieces of himself that tethered him to Earth, to his past. But now, as he stood in the chamber, his body changed, his senses heightened. He wasn't sure if he had lost something or gained something new. He looked at Talon again, this time truly seeing her, not as a healer, not as an alien, but as someone like him. A connection beyond words passed between them. And for the first time since crashing onto this world, Ryan didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like he belonged. The chamber doors opened, and the elders entered. Ryan turned to face them, his stance steady despite the strangeness of his new body. The first elder studied him, eyes dark and unreadable. "It is done." Ryan inclined his head slightly. He wasn't sure if bowing was a thing here, but it felt like the right move. "Guess there's no going back now." "There was never going back," the elder replied. Ryan exhaled, a habit he would have to unlearn. "Right. So what happens now?" The second elder stepped forward. "Now, you must prove that you are truly one of us." Ryan stiffened. "Prove?" Talon tensed beside him. That was not part of the binding. The third elder's gaze flicked to her. "The transformation is only the first step. He must earn his place among us." Ryan crossed his arms. "I just went through some serious biological remodeling. What more do you want?" The first elder's bioluminescence darkened in a way that made Ryan's skin crawl. "You have been granted life, but not acceptance." Ryan clenched his jaw. "And how exactly do I earn that?" The elder's gaze was cold. "The Abyss trial." Silence filled the chamber. Talon's fingers curled into fists. "That is unnecessary. He is not prepared." Ryan glanced at her. "Okay, see, that reaction? Not exactly filling me with confidence." Talon's markings flickered rapidly, a warning. "The Abyss is the deepest trench of our world," she said, voice tight. "It is where the old ones sleep, where only the strongest survive." Ryan narrowed his eyes. "And you want me to go down there?" The first elder remained impassive. "If you are truly one of us, the depths will accept you." Ryan exhaled. He had barely adjusted to his new body, and now they wanted to throw him into some kind of deep-sea death pit? He glanced at Talon. Her markings pulsed in quiet urgency. "You don't have to do this," she was saying, without words. But Ryan knew the truth. If he refused, he was nothing more than an experiment, a creature who did not belong. If he wanted to survive, if he wanted to truly live, he had to prove himself. Ryan rolled his shoulders, testing the movement. His body was lighter in the water now, his strength different, his senses sharper. Maybe he wasn't the same man who had crash-landed on this world. Maybe that was a good thing. He turned to the elders and squared his shoulders. "All right," he said. "Guess I'm going for a swim." The abyss loomed before him, a vast chasm that swallowed all light. Ryan hovered at its edge, staring down into the endless black below. His newly enhanced vision could only penetrate so far before the darkness became absolute, a yawning void that pulsed with something ancient, something alive. Talon floated beside him, tension evident in the rigid way she held herself. You do not have to do this, she murmured. Ryan let out a breath, or at least the equivalent of one in his new body. Pretty sure I do. The elders are testing you. Her bioluminescent markings flared in frustration. This is not a trial. It is a death sentence. Ryan's lips quirked into a lopsided grin. Then I guess I better make sure I come back alive, huh? Talon's expression darkened, but she said nothing. The elders floated above them, their gaze unwavering. The depths do not lie, the first elder intoned. They will either accept you or consume you. Ryan rolled his shoulders. His body still felt strange, but there was a power to it, a weightlessness that made the water feel like an extension of himself. He wasn't the same man who had crashed onto this world. He wasn't sure what he was anymore. But there was only one way to find out. With one final glance at Talon, Ryan turned and descended into the abyss. The pressure increased the deeper he went. At first, it was subtle, a faint squeeze around his body, a tightness in his head. Then it grew heavier, pressing against his bones, his muscles, his mind. The water here was colder, thicker, and the silence was absolute. Ryan's vision adjusted to the darkness, but even his new senses struggled to grasp what lay ahead. Shadows moved in the periphery, or maybe they didn't. The deeper he swam, the more the lines between reality and hallucination blurred. Then, the voices began. Not sounds, not words, whispers in the water. Ryan stiffened. He twisted in the darkness, scanning his surroundings, but there was nothing, just the crushing black, stretching in all directions. Then, movement. Something massive shifted below him. Ryan's breath caught, or it would have, if he still breathed. A shape emerged from the abyss, too large, too fluid, too wrong. It was not a single creature but a presence, a mass of coiling tendrils and luminous eyes that flickered in and out of existence. A thought, not his own, pushed into his mind. You do not belong. Ryan's pulse pounded in his skull. His new instinct screamed at him to flee, to swim up, to escape, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The thing in the abyss regarded him, shifting in slow, impossible ways. What are you? Ryan swallowed. His throat, his gills, contracted around the thick water. I don't know, he admitted. The darkness stirred. A low, resonant hum filled the trench, vibrating through his bones. Then, it reached for him. A tendril of inky blackness slithered forward, coiling around his arm. It wasn't solid, not exactly. It was liquid, shadow, something else entirely. And when it touched him, something inside him changed. Pain flared through his body. Not physical pain, something deeper. His mind stretched, his vision fractured, his body unraveled and reformed all at once. Memories, not his own, flooded into him. He saw a world before the Merithi, before the elders, before anything he could comprehend. He saw creatures older than time, beings who had lived in the abyss before light had ever touched the ocean. And he saw himself, not as he was now, not as a human, not as a Merithi, but as something else entirely. Something new, something that had never existed before. The abyss whispered around him. You are neither. You are both. You are ours. Ryan gasped, or at least he tried. The abyss consumed him. Talon waited at the edge of the trench, her markings dim with worry. He had been down there for too long. No one returned from the abyss. No one ever had. And yet, she waited. Then, the water shifted. A presence rose from the depths. At first, she thought it was something else. A shadow, a remnant of the deep. But then she saw him. Ryan emerged, his form changed. His skin shimmered darker, his bioluminescent patterns more intricate, pulsing with a rhythm that was not purely Merithi. His eyes, black, endless, full of the abyss itself, met hers. Talon inhaled sharply. Ryan? He tilted his head, considering the name, the word, the idea of himself. And then, he smiled. Not entirely human, not entirely Merithi. Something else, something new, something unknown. He reached out, and without hesitation, Talon took his hand. The abyss had not taken him. It had remade him, and the world would never be the same. Ryan floated just beyond the abyss, the weight of the ocean no longer a burden, but an extension of himself. He felt everything now. The pulse of the Merithi city behind him, the distant hum of unseen life drifting through the water, the rhythmic pull of the tides stretching beyond the trench. And below him, the abyss still whispered, not in words, not in threats, in recognition. It had marked him, changed him, accepted him, and now he was something new. Talon held his hand, her grip firm, her markings flickering in uncertain patterns. You are not the same. Ryan turned to her, his newly darkened skin shimmering under the faint glow of the deep-sea currents. I know. She studied him for a long moment. Her tendrils shifted slightly, uncertain. Do you still know who you are? Ryan considered that. He could still remember his crash, the fire, the pain, the desperate struggle to survive. He could still remember waking up in the med chamber, his awkward encounters with Talon, the slow, careful way trust had formed between them. He still remembered Earth, the stars, the weight of gravity, the feeling of air in his lungs. But those memories felt distant now, like echoes. He was still Ryan Porter, but Ryan Porter had been human. And now? Now, he was something else. I think I know who I am, he said slowly, but I don't think I'm the same person who fell out of the sky. Talon's gaze searched his. And does that trouble you? Ryan thought about it. Then, he smiled. No. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he was fighting against something. Not against gravity. Not against fate. Not against himself. He had spent so long trying to get back to who he was before the crash. But that person had died in the wreckage. This was a new beginning. Talon let out a slow breath, the tension in her shoulders easing. Her markings pulsed gently, warmly. We should return to the elders, she said. Ryan exhaled, or at least, the new version of an exhale. Yeah, they're probably waiting to see if I got eaten. He flexed his fingers, adjusting to the way his new body moved, then kicked forward with ease. The water no longer resisted him. It welcomed him. He didn't just swim now. He belonged. Together, he and Talon ascended, leaving the abyss behind. But it did not leave him. The Hall of Elders was silent when they entered. The three elders stood before them, their dark, liquid eyes unreadable. They had been watching, waiting. Ryan hovered in the center of the chamber, letting the weight of their judgment press down on him. Finally, the first elder spoke. You have returned. Ryan smirked. Yeah, you're welcome. The elder's gaze flickered, but there was no amusement in it. Only calculation. The abyss did not reject you, the second elder said, studying him carefully. It has claimed you. Ryan shrugged. Claim. Accept semantics. The third elder leaned forward. Do you understand what you have become? Ryan met their gaze. Not yet. A pause. But I think I'm ready to find out. Silence stretched between them. Then, slowly, the first elder inclined his head. Then you will remain. Ryan blinked. He had expected more resistance, more trials, more proof. But the elders had already seen all they needed. He was no longer an outsider. He was one of them. Talon's markings pulsed with quiet relief. The elders turned to her. You have done well, Healer Talon, the second elder said. This one is yours to guide now. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Wait, what does that mean? Talon glanced at him. It means you are my responsibility. Ryan's smirk widened. Lucky you. Her markings flickered with amusement. The first elder regarded them both for a long moment. Go, he said finally. Learn what you have become. And with that, the judgment was over. Ryan was free. The city stretched before him, vast and alive, its luminous pathways winding through the depths like veins of light. Ryan drifted beside Talon, taking it all in, not as a visitor, not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. This is home now, he said aloud, testing the words. Talon glanced at him. Does that trouble you? Ryan thought about Earth, his past, his old life. Then, he thought about the abyss, the way the water had embraced him, the way he had survived. No, he said softly. It doesn't. Talon's markings pulsed warmly. Then come, she said, extending a hand. Let me show you what it means to be Merithi. Ryan took her hand without hesitation, and together, they disappeared into the city. Epilogue. The deep calls. Far below, the abyss slumbered. But not all things in the deep remain asleep. The darkness stirred. Something ancient watched. Something waited. And far above, in the city of light, Ryan Porter, no longer fully human, no longer fully Merithi, felt the first pull of the abyss in his blood. It would call for him again, and one day he would answer.